Contemporary Ascetics of Mount Athos, Volume 1, written by Archimandrite Cherubim Karambelas, published by St. Herman of Alaska Brotherhood, first printing 1992. The author dedicates this work to the wrestlers and athletes of blessed monastic obedience. Introduction. 1. The climate of modern-age Athos. The modern spiritual classic, Contemporary Ascetics of Mount Athos, acquaints the reader with the authentic monastic life of the elders of the Holy Mountain. Father Cherubim selected as the subjects of his narratives the spiritual guides who helped to determine the spiritual climate of Mount Athos, which he met upon his arrival there in 1938. His memoirs, filled with touching anecdotes depicting many aspects of spiritual warfare, are set forth in From the Garden of the Panagia, Nostalgic Remembrances, which was recently published in the English language as Recollections of Mount Athos. This wonderful book is an excellent introduction to the rich literary corpus on Athonite spirituality. It will serve the reader as a faithful companion to the present work by disclosing with human language in a small way the hidden inner life of those ascetics enlightened by Jesus Christ. Contemporary Ascetics of Mount Athos, published now as a 2-volume set, was originally issued as a series over the span of 10 years. It was written specifically to reawaken among young Greek men and women an awareness of the inward vitality inherent in Orthodox monasticism. The English reader, however, is not very familiar with the larger spiritual family to which these holy men of modern times belong. At present, the majority of the 20 monasteries on the peninsula known as Mount Athos are experiencing a period of steady growth. Since the late 1960s, many monasteries have reverted back to the healthy and traditional common Cenobitic way of life. Buildings are being repaired and rebuilt in good taste. Ancient frescoes now shine with the luster that they were intended to have. Books are still cherished that are fundamental to the union of man and God, and young men are cutting off their own wills within the ancient walls of these citadels in their desire to join themselves to their Redeemer. While many monasteries appeared to be shrinking into oblivion in the middle decades of this century, it is in the last 200 years that the monks of Mount Athos witnessed great saints and events which have proved this mountain to indeed be holy. Since by 1965 the disintegration of monastic life looked serious, Father Cherubim undertook the priceless labor of presenting through these fathers the characteristics of a life shared with God. He began the accounts of these ascetics with the portrait of his own elder and spiritual brother, Father Joachim, whom he had known very closely while living in St. Anne's Skeet. The next 7 sketches depict elders who were almost legendary at the time of Father Cherubim's arrival on Mount Athos. Elders Philaret and Gerasim are portrayed by the pen of Father Ioannikios, the disciple and co-laborer of Father Cherubim, being composed after the latter's death in 1979, in the same style and with the same intent. Two, St. Paisius Velyczkowski. The 17th and early 18th centuries were marked by a steady decline on Mount Athos in numbers of monks, the lack of familiarity with monastic tradition, the destruction of monasteries and monastery property by fire, the spread of the idiorhythmic way of life, the disappearance of traditional art forms, and the lack of access to the patristic writings. Yet it is also true that there were saints living at this time on Mount Athos. As late as 1750, St. Akakios of Kaso-Kalivia reposed. But the primary manifestation of Christian witness at this time remained as martyrdom. Tens of thousands of Orthodox Christians have been martyred for their faith by the Turks, stemming from the fall of Constantinople in the 15th century and continuing until the 20th century. The great elder Paisios Velyczkowski, leaving his homeland in the Russian Empire at a young age and arriving on Mount Athos in 1746, found monasticism there, as in his homeland, at a low ebb. He settled there, and soon brothers came to him entreating him to be their spiritual father. Many years later, in his famous letter to Archimandrite Theodosius of the Sophianev Hermitage, He described his great efforts to base his teaching not on himself, but on the Holy Scripture, the teaching of the God-bearing Fathers, and the holy councils of the Fathers. First of all, I began diligently to acquire, by God's help, and with not a little labor and expense, the patristic books which teach of obedience and sobriety, nepsis, of heedfulness and prayer. He began to copy out of the books of St. Hesychius the Presbyter, St. Philotheus of Sinai, and St. Theodore of Edessa. He writes, "Then I went to the great skete of the Lavra, St. Anne's, and to the skete of Vatopedi, St. Demetrios, and to the other lavras and monasteries everywhere asking learned people, and the eldest and the most experienced confessors and venerable monks, for the patristic books by name. Nowhere, however, was I able to obtain such books, but from everyone I received the same set answer, that not only have we not known such books up till now, but we have never even heard of the names of such saints." He found the very centers of Athonite monastic life at this time to be still slumbering. In St. Basil's skete beneath the hill of the prophet Elias, at the southern end of Mount Athos, which was inhabited by monks of Caesarea of Cappadocia, he beheld, to the delight of his soul, on a little table in a monk's cell, an open copy of the book of St. Peter Damascene. The same monk told him that there was more by the same saint, and that he had the books of St. Anthony the Great, St. Gregory of Sinai, but not all, St. Philotheus, St. Hesychius, St. Diodocus of Photiki, St. Thalassius, St. Simeon the New Theologian's homily on prayer, St. Nicephorus the monk's homily on prayer, the book of St. Isaiah, and other such books, but only 22 chapters of Nicetas Stathatos. It was these very books which later appeared in 1782 in the famous anthology entitled by St. Macarius of Corinth, the Philokalia, the love of the beautiful and the good. This collection of patristic wisdom was the catalyst which was to facilitate for generations to come the transformation of monastic life on Mount Athos. It is most probable that this search of St. Paisios and his challenge to stand for patristic principles evoked among the monks of the Holy Mountain the zeal with which they afterwards transformed their ways. 3. The Kolavades. Before the publication of the Philokalia in Greek, in 1782, several events occurred which would in turn lead to an era of great activity on the Holy Mountain. About 1743, Father Neophytus of the skete of Kalsokalivia, in cooperation with monks of the Vatopedi monastery, opened an Athonite academy. Father Neophytus, a convert from Judaism to the Orthodox Christian faith, had first taught in a school in Chios after leaving his native Peloponnese. Although many passed through the school, its main importance in retrospect is the renewed awareness of the Holy Orthodox tradition which it triggered, especially as would soon be expressed by the leaders of the Kolavades movement in the approaching decades. One student at this school we cannot fail to mention, St. Cosmas Etelos. Finishing the academy, he became a monk at the holy monastery of Philotheu, where he labored for 12 years. Afterwards, he traveled throughout northern Greece and Albania, preaching the rudiments of the Christian faith to a people long in bondage to the Turks and in isolation from orthodoxy. He finished his life by martyrdom around the year 1779, rightly earning the title of equal to the apostles. About the time that Elder Paisios was collecting the writings of the Holy Fathers on Mount Athos, a disturbance arose in St. Anne's skete because of the desire of a number of monks there to serve memorial services on Sundays. The dissenters immediately explained that because of the celebration of the resurrection, memorial services are not served on Sundays, but rather on Saturdays. The name Kolavades was eventually applied in a derogatory manner to this latter group of monks on account of the boiled wheat, or the koliva, which is eaten after memorial services in commemoration of the dead. The positive aspect to this dispute is that these Kolavades began to delve more deeply into the Christian tradition, and especially into the mystical and ascetical writings. At about this time, Father Neophytos began expounding at the academy the need for frequent communion, which was then no longer the common practice. He eventually wrote a book on this subject, which sparked controversy, and he soon left Mount Athos for the island of Chios off the coast of Asia Minor, not far from the famous city of Smyrna. Later he worked extensively in Romania. Father Neophytos was succeeded by Father Eugene Volgaris, who later became Bishop of Cherson in the Crimea. Although Father Eugene had little effect on the Kolovadis movement, he considerably furthered Greek education in his day. He in turn was succeeded by Father Athanasios of Paros, 1722 to 1813, who together with St. Macarius of Corinth and St. Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain became the main spokesmen and leaders of the Kolovadis movement. Father Athanasios studied in Smyrna, Athos, and then in Corfu, later returning to the Holy Mountain to head the Athonite Academy. He was very outspoken in his emphasis of Orthodox tradition, the celebration of memorial services, frequent Holy Communion, and his adherence to the writings of the Fathers, including the works of St. Gregory Palamas, which he later persuaded St. Nicodemus to prepare for publication. Quote, "He could not remain there very long as a consequence of the attitude that he adopted in the disturbances which shook Mount Athos." End quote. A source still unpublished relates the incidences which troubled the peace of Athos in this epoch. It is Athanasius of Paros in the pamphlet which he has left us, quote, "Declaration of the Truth on the Troubles of Mount Athos." Father Athanasios, newly ordained to the priesthood by St. Macarius of Corinth, was forced to leave Mount Athos and was even placed under anathema for a number of years, together with Father Christopher of Arta and Father Agapius of Cyprus. He then taught high school in Thessaloniki and later undertook the direction of an important school in the island of Chios in 1781. 4. St. Macarius of Corinth and St. Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain. Far better known than Father Athanasios of Paros is his contemporary, St. Macarius of Corinth, who lived from 1731 to 1805, a monk of the monastery of the Great Cave in the Peloponnese who became Bishop of Corinth in 1765. As a consequence of the insurrection of the Peloponnesus, which soon followed, he was deprived of his diocese. He moved to the island of Hydra off the coast of the Peloponnesus, where he was first visited by his future co-worker, St. Nicodemus of Mount Athos, then still a layman. Later, St. Macarius went to Chios and then on to Mount Athos in 1777, where he aligned himself to the Kolovadis. It was here that St. Macarius would begin his monumental collaboration with St. Nicodemus. As a young man, St. Nicodemus, who lived from 1749 to 1809, met in his native of Naxos, an island in the Cyclades next to Paros, the Kolovadis monks who had earlier left Mount Athos during the initial disputes. These were the priest-monks Gregory and Niphon, and the monk Arsenios, all of whom were well versed in the Athonite way of life and practitioners of the spiritual art of hesychism. Their influence and that of St. Macarius and Father Sylvester of Cappadocia, then both residing in Hydra, was decisive in his resolve to become a monk on Mount Athos. At 27 years of age, he reached Mount Athos and settled in Dionysiou Monastery. It was there, while occupied with ascetic warfare, that he heard of Abba Paisios Velichkovsky the Russian, who was at that time in Bogdania, now Romania. The abbot Paisios had under his guidance over 1,000 brothers, whom he taught the science of noetic prayer. Nicodemus, being an ardent lover of that deifying prayer, decided to go there. The boat on which he sailed from Athos, however, was overcome by a violent storm at sea, and only with difficulty was brought to port at the island of Thasos. There the saint changed his mind about the trip to Bogdania and returned to Athos, not, however, to the monastery of Dionysiou, but to a cell at the skeet of the Pantocrator. After a time, the virtuous monk Arsenios of the Peloponnesus came to live at the same cell. The saint entered obedience to him and found in him his first teacher of noetic prayer. By the time St. Nicodemus again encountered St. Macarius, the latter had acquired rare writings on the prayer of the heart, an early manuscript of the Philokalia. St. Paisios describes his find thus: "He came to the holy mountain of Athos and found in all the libraries of the holy monasteries many such patristic books, which until then he had not possessed. Above all, in the library of the most glorious and great monastery of Vatopedi he acquired a priceless treasure, a book on the union of the mind with God, gathered from all the saints by great zealots in ancient times, and other books on prayer which until then we had not heard of. It had taken 20 years, and a man such as St. Macarius, to understand what St. Paisios had been doing. Professor Papadoulis puts it in this way: it is not accidental that almost all the Greek texts which Paisios was interested in again found in the Philokalia. These texts were no longer in use among the Greeks. St. Macarius was assisted in this task by St. Nicodemus, who gave the published texts their final form. He also urged him to undertake correcting and making additions to the Evangelios, as well as his book on frequent communion. At the same time, a contention arose regarding the frequency with which Holy Communion should be received. St. Macarius played a leading part in this question through the publication of his book concerning continual communion of the divine mysteries. This book provoked a storm of criticism among the anti-Kolovadis on Athos. Because of such an unhealthy climate, St. Macarius left Mount Athos for Smyrna in the late 1770s to gather the finances and resources to publish these books. For many years he continued to travel throughout the Aegean islands. This was not an isolated incident. St. Nicodemus, too, traveled at this time with his elder Arsenios to the small barren island of Sciropula across from Euboea. There they practiced the strict ascetic life for 1 year. Here he wrote a handbook of spiritual counsel, which not only shows how knowledgeable he was in both the secular and sacred learning of his times, but how he also transformed the life of the Spirit into a way of life, and the way of life into the way of the Spirit. It is true that only a pure heart, completely liberated from worldly cares, has the ability to enter into the refreshing waters of Orthodox theology, to ascend the steps of perfection, and to transmit its divine experience to all of us. He then returned to Athos and continued throughout the rest of his very fruitful life to publish scores of books on the Orthodox faith and the monastic life. He authored, corrected, or published more than 100 works. These books transformed monastic life on Mount Athos, and monks at the present day are still greatly indebted to St. Nicodemus. 5. Mount Athos and the Aegean Islands. Many of the Kolovadis, however, left Mount Athos and scattered all over Greece, especially the Aegean Islands, becoming spiritual awakeners and reformers through their homilies, personal counsels, confessions, the establishment of monasteries that developed into luminous centers of spiritual life. The most important center for the exiled monks at this time was Chios. Here monk Athanasios of Paros, having left Mount Athos, became the head of the Chios school and disseminated monastic philosophy. One of his students was St. Nikephoros of Chios, who indirectly contributed to the rebirth of Athonite monasticism. He was tonsured a monk there on the island, in the ancient monastery of the Theotokos called Neomoni. Upon the arrival of St. Macarius in 1790, St. Nikephoros became his disciple. For a time he taught in the Chios school. When St. Macarius settled in the nearby hermitage at Resta, he frequently sought his counsel. In 1803, shortly before the death of St. Macarius, St. Nikephoros joined him at the small community of St. George in that locale. An Athonite Kolovas named Joseph lived there together with an ascetic named Nilus the Hermit. Eventually, in 1812, Father Athanasios of Paros joined them, and it is probably here in the last months before his death that he composed the Life of St. Macarius of Corinth. St. Nikephoros' main achievements are in hymnography and hagiography. He compiled a new spiritual meadow which presents the saints of his time. After having left Mount Athos while traveling through Greece on the island of Patmos, St. Macarius met 3 Athonite Kolavadis. The priest-monk Niphon of Chios, called the Synobiarch, who reposed 1814, and his disciples Gregory Hagistamatis and Athanasios. They remained in close touch with St. Macarius, who supported them financially, first on the island of Icaria and later in 1794 when he aided them in the construction of the monastery of the Annunciation on the island of Skiathos. This monastery was fundamental, both to the spread of the Kolavadis movement and spirit throughout the Aegean Sea, and to the embodiment of these ideas well into the 19th and 20th centuries. Father Niphon was the first abbot of this monastery, followed by his disciple, Father Gregory Hagistamatis, Abbot Flavian, and Abbot Alypius. Father Alypius was the brother of the literary writer Epiphanios Demetriadis of Logothou, whose son, the nephew of Alypius, was Elder Dionysios of the monastery of the Theotokos of Konistria. He was exiled in 1850 to the island of Thera at the southern edge of the Cyclades because of his valuable work as a co-laborer with Christopher Papulakos, a monk of the monastery of the Great Cave of the Peloponnese, where St. Macarius of Corinth had been tonsured a century earlier. Father Christopher preached the gospel throughout the Peloponnese Peninsula in the 1850s and effected a national spiritual revival centered in the Peloponnesus. Elder Dionysios the scholar of Konistria, an important link between the original 18th century Kolavadis and modern literature about Mount Athos, was a relative and instructor of Papadiamanti of Morea, who in turn was the father of Alexander Papadiamantis and the uncle of Alexander Moratides, 2 outstanding literary figures who lived during the period covered by the present volume. Father Cherubim drew extensively on their writings for contemporary ascetics of Mount Athos. These 2 were instrumental in turning their educated countrymen back to an orthodox way of life, and both of them wrote about Mount Athos. These talented men, having been nurtured on the island of Skiathos in the northern Sporades with a reverence for the Kolavadis tradition, cherished this tradition throughout their lives. They later lived in Athens and were assistants of the holy pastor Papa Nicholas Planas, who reposed in 1932. Papa Nicholas, in contrast to these 2 men, was poorly educated and extremely simple, yet he became known as a great confessor of the Orthodox faith, suffering much from false shepherds. He was well known for his daily celebration of the Divine Liturgy and frequent all-night vigils which the previously mentioned writers attended. Another member of this fellowship was the apologist iconographer Photius Contiglu, who reposed in 1965, whose many-faceted articles and books on faith in God and the Orthodox tradition made many aware of the great richness of their orthodoxy. His writings have been influential in the resurgence of monasticism on the Holy Mountain, while the monks have always had before them the unsurpassed frescoes of Theophanes the Cretan and Manuel Panselinos. It is only in the last quarter century, since the death of Photius Contiglu, that the traditional art of iconography has been actively restored on Mount Athos as an artistic and mystical expression of the perennial Orthodox monastic soul. 6. St. Arsenios of Paros, another significant group of Kolavadis who left Athos at the beginning of the 19th century, settled on the island of Paros, located in the center of the Cyclades Islands. The abbot of the monastery of Longovardo on Paros was Philotheus. Father Philotheus, as well as Father Kiro Papadopoulos, and a group of monks living at the monastic settlement of St. George on the same island, had all left Mount Athos to cultivate the inward activity in an area free from the controversies of the time. A certain Kolivas, Elder Daniel from Thessaly, with his disciple, the future St. Arsenios the New, departed from Mount Athos for similar reasons and arrived on Paros in the early 1820s. They had earlier known Abbot Philotheus during the 6 years that they had spent on the Holy Mountain. Elder Daniel and St. Arsenios, however, soon moved onto the island located in the southwestern direction at the edge of the Cyclades. There they spent the next 20 years, enlightening the local populace with their wisdom. It is a characteristic of this period that many of those monks who left Mount Athos functioned as great benefactors of their countrymen in many ways. In the fields of education and letters, by expounding the Orthodox faith and by being radiant with gifts of God, possessing spiritual treasures of great value, tried by experience, they freely shared their wisdom and insight with their impoverished brothers and led them unto the fullness of the stature of Christ. A few years after the repose of his elder in 1840, St. Arsenios, as he was passing through Paros, was persuaded by Abbot Elias, the successor of Abbot Kirill, to abide in the monastery of St. George. "Brother Arsenios, listen to me. It is not the will of God that you go to the holy mountain. God's will is that you stay here with us. It is God who sent you here, and the prayers of our holy fathers Daniel and Kirill have brought you here. Stay with us then. Here you will both be benefited more and will benefit others more than on Mount Athos." St. Arsenios surpassed all his brothers in spiritual striving and watchfulness. Father Philotheus Zervakos depicts his life thus. He ate only once a day, and his food was very plain. As his spiritual food, he had the reading of the divine scriptures and the writings of the Holy Fathers. He partook of this food with great eagerness and gratification, regarding it as more necessary and more beneficial than bodily material food. After the death of Father Elias, St. Arsenios became the abbot of the monastery of St. George. As a confessor, he attracted the faithful from all parts of Greece, as well as from the Holy Mountain itself. He also became the confessor of the monastery of Longovarda, which continues to be a beacon of Athonite, authentic monastic life, even down to our own days, in the person of Elder Philotheus Zervakos, and the convent of the Transfiguration of Paros, a cross which was to prove nearly too difficult to bear. We have seen that the entire monastery of Longovarda on the island of Paros comes from the direct line of the Kolevaris. It would not be too much to say that monastic life in Greece could not have continued to exist outside of Athos without the influence of the Kolevaris. Nor, indeed, could Athonite monasticism have been able to recover in the 19th century had not the minds of the young sons of orthodoxy turned back to the spiritual center of their faith. For after all, no one is born on Mount Athos. Monks must come from elsewhere. Men go there, leaving behind the ways of pragmatism, because of a desire to be made whole as citizens of the eminent kingdom and reign. Father Cherubim writes of the young Demetrios from Smyrna, the future elder Daniel of Katonachia, that he came to Paros around the year 1870 to seek the counsel of Elder Arsenios. Elder Daniel received his advice with joy and went to Mount Athos. He took up his abode in St. Pantalemon's monastery just prior to the turbulent period of the transfer of the monastery authority from Greek into Russian hands. He was compelled to move from place to place for 6 to 7 years before finally settling in the barren Katonachia. Here, for nearly half a century, he served as the model and expositor of the Athonite monastic tradition. His life is set forth in chapter 4 of the present work. Introduction continued 7. St. Nectarios Cephalas. Elder Daniel had close fellowship with many great spiritual figures of his time. 3 of the other elders, whose lives are included in this present book, were part of the same spiritual family. This includes the elders Callinicus, chapter 3, Ignatius of Katonachia, chapter 7, and Elder Kodratos of Karakalu, chapter 8. It is also likely that Elder Sabas, chapter 6, was also one of his fellow conversors. Additionally, as mentioned in his life, he guided the abbess Theodosia of Ketrovunia on the island of Tinos over a period of many years. It was here, in the holy monastery of the Theotokos, the Queen of the Angels, that the wife of Alexander Moratides, the disciple of Elder Daniel the Hesychist, became a nun. Moratides himself, who was the nephew of Elder Dionysios the Scholar, corresponded with Elder Daniel the Hesychist for 30 years. He ended his life on his native island of Skiathos. He was tonsured a monk with the name Andronicus by a disciple of Father Daniel, Metropolitan Gregory, and died only a few weeks later. Elder Daniel's greatest contemporary was St. Nectarios Kephalos, who lived from 1846 to 1920. St. Nectarios visited Elder Daniel in the 1890s, and they corresponded until St. Nectarios' death. They both were guides to the young Philotheus Zervakos. John Marvos has written, St. Nectarios could properly be characterized as a new Kolivas, continuing the struggle for strict orthodoxy and spiritual life of the famous Kolivadis of the 18th century, St. Nicodemus, Makarios, and others. Both of these men were prolific writers who strove to edify and confirm their neighbors, thereby setting the tone for Orthodox thought for many decades to come. In a manner very similar to St. Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain and St. Makarios, they tried to cope with contemporary problems and controversies from a patristic perspective, being entreated by their contemporaries to express the teachings of the Holy Fathers on various questions. St. Nectarios settled on Chios in the 1860s and often visited the monastery of the Holy Fathers and conversed about the ascetic life with the devout restorer of the monastery, Father Pachomius. As he aspired to the angelic habit of the monks, he entered Neomoni, the new monastery, and was tonsured a monk. It was natural that St. Nectarios felt a strong kinship with the Kolivadis movement. After all, he'd been tonsured in the same cenobium where St. Nikephoros of Chios had been the abbot, and which figures centrally in the spiritual currents of the 18th and 19th centuries. St. Nectarios, however, concentrated primarily on pastoral and dogmatic themes as they applied to the needs at hand, for the primary sources of Orthodox tradition had already been made available by his spiritual forebears. St. Savas, the new of Kalymnos, who reposed in 1948, a monk of St. Anne's Skeet, being a close friend of St. Nectarios during the decade prior to the hierarch's death, closely resembles St. Nectarios in his simplicity, purity, and guilelessness. The dawn of the 19th century was a very prosperous time on Mount Athos. Due to the spread of the Hesychist teaching and the publication of books on patristic asceticism, monasticism on Mount Athos mushroomed. Matters changed, however, at the time of the Greek struggle for independence in 1821. Thousands of Turkish soldiers overran Mount Athos, and a similar number of monks fled, primarily from the larger monasteries to the Greek islands, the newly liberated territory of Greece, while others fled back to Moldavia and the Russian Empire. Nevertheless, the Orthodox monastic philosophy had been put in the air, and writings on the spiritual life were now available. There remained outstanding ascetics who lived by these and helped to bring about the repopulation of the land of the monks to a degree never witnessed before. As early as 1772, Elder Neophytos the Confessor arrived on Mount Athos and settled in Kafso-Kalivia. Born in Asia Minor, he was 17 years of age upon arrival. He spent the next 88 years on the Holy Mountain. He became a leading spiritual guide supporting a vast number of monks living the ascetic life. One of the greatest spiritual fathers of the early 19th century, he functioned as the confessor of 5 Athonite monasteries. He outlived the Turkish occupation in the 1820s and lived to see the flowering of the Athonite desert in the 30s and 40s. Elder Neophytos' fellow ascetic, Father Gideon, who reposed in 1869, is a prime example of the extreme sorrows faced by monastic pilgrims of his day. Having spent a decade in St. Pantalemon's monastery from about 1810 to 1820, he found a refuge in Kafso-Kalivia. About this time, the majority of the monks fled the Lavra because of the Turkish occupation, whereupon the Lavra authorities required the induction of various desert dwellers who were living on Lavra territory. For many years he suffered harassment, not only from the Turkish soldiers, pirates, thieves, and the Pasha of Thessaloniki, but also from false brethren who, in cooperation with the Turks, continually drove him from his desert oasis into servitude to Muslim soldiers. Late in the 1830s, his life became less disturbed, and his disciples gathered around his desert hut. He slept only 2 hours a day, occupying himself unceasingly with noetic prayer of the heart, and strictly maintained silence. 8. Haji George. Around 1825, a youth named Gabriel, the future Haji Georges, who lived from 1809 to 1886, whose life was also written by St. Paisios the Athonite, joined Elder Neophytos. Gabriel was from Asia Minor as well and could at first communicate only in Turkish. By 1830, both of these ascetics had already settled in the desert of Kerosia, at first in the cells, the Kelion of the Holy Apostles, and later in that of St. Demetrios. Haji George was for many years registered formally as the elder of their Kelion, since Father Neophytos preferred this, since their way of life became termed the rule of Haji George. They never ate fish, eggs, dairy products, wine, or oil, even on the great feasts. They owned one robe each, and they went barefoot. Their food, rather, was to console the poor and sorrowing, to calm the tempest-tossed, to make peace between enemies. The more severe this way of life became, the more zealous young ascetics would come, desiring to join themselves to these amazing men of God and to adopt their marvelous way of life. During those years, an average of 30 monks lived in the caves and hovels around the St. Demetrius Kelion. Due to the austerity of their life, many of these disciples, they died at a tender age. This was accentuated after 1870, when Haji George began to attract scores of Russian disciples. It is stated that before his death in exile in Constantinople, he had buried with his own hands more than 100 young ascetics, who had chosen rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. One of his disciples was hero monk Anthony, who with a group of 12 monks settled in the large St. Nicholas skete called Burizari, where later Harlambos of Dionysio settled, under St. Joseph the Hesychist. To continue, another disciple was Elder Neophytos at Katonaki, whose manner of life is described in chapter 7 of this book, Elder Ignatius the Confessor. From time to time, the strict Elder Haji George would seek counsel of his contemporary and great luminary, the Elder Hilarion the Iberian, who came to Athos in the first decades of the 19th century from the country of Georgia. His reputation was that of a living saint. He in turn had close ties with Elder Neophytos the Confessor, who died only a few years before he did. Father Hilarion's way of life was similar to that of the great fathers of Egypt, Sinai, and Palestine. He dwelt for a time in the holy monastery of Yveron, and in the Yveron skete, Little St. Anne's, and in the tower of New Skete, where he lived as a recluse, in fasting and prayer, and warring with demons. Eventually, the fathers of St. Paul Monastery, finding him half dead, brought him for a time to the monastery to recuperate. Elder Hilarion by that time had become the confessor for a rapidly growing number of Russian monks on Mount Athos. In later years, he dwelt above Dionysio Monastery in the Kathisma of St. James with his disciple Elder Sabas, who joined him in 1843. Elder Sabas dwelt on the holy mountain for more than 60 years. He became an expert spiritual physician whose major gifts were surgery on lost souls and exorcism. Yet Elder Sabas was a confessor, to whose cell in Little St. Anne's an endless stream of penitents came daily. He embodied the ideals of the Kolavadis as well as those of all living a monastic life according to the precepts of the Holy Fathers. In part 1 of his life, Father Cherubim speaks of his practice of almost daily communion, and that, quote, he did not pass a single day without Holy Communion. In part 6, we're informed that a monk named Arsenios from Chios, living in the vicinity of Little St. Anne's, came to him hoping to find in him a support for his desire to commune more frequently. Elder Sabas, in order to comfort him, says, "You can come to me." Later, for a more permanent solution, he sends the same monk to a Kelion in Kafso-Kalivia, where this practice was the norm. Elder Sabas the Confessor, who is chronologically the earliest of the ascetics, whom Father Cherubim describes, is very accessible to the reader because of the endearing manner in which he is portrayed and because of his great love for his neighbors. Elder Sabas died in 1908, about a generation before the author came to live on Mount Athos. The ascetics of that region were still profiting from the fruits of his monastic toil when Father Cherubim arrived in 1938. Another righteous monk of this period, Father Daniel of Little St. Anne's, followed his spiritual father, Elder Neophytos of the Huts of the Archangels, to Grigoriou and succeeded him there as the abbot in 1830s. He retired after 12 years and returned to his former abode. Afterwards, he went to St. Basil's Skeet and dwelt near the church of St. Makarios. Wishing to live closer to the sea, he settled permanently in the broad ravine at Katanakia, which at that time in the 1850s was sparsely populated. Here he built a small hesychasterion, dedicated to St. Gerasim the New of Kefalonia. Father Daniel sought the advice of the great elder Hilarion the Georgian on questions of fasting and on the ascetic life. Elder Hilarion gave him a very simple rule of only moderate fasting in contrast to the severe ascetic life of the local desert dwellers. 1 meal a day and twice a day on weekends. While Elder Hilarion was living in the tower of New Skeet, his disciple would bring him food once every fortnight. He would place it in a narrow-mouthed jar and eat only what he was able to draw out in his hand. In 1875, Father Daniel was joined by the future Elder Kalinikos the Hesychist, see chapter 3, who settled in a nearby hut, perhaps a stone's throw away. Besides the writings of St. Gregory Palamas and St. Isaac the Syrian, their great love was the Philokalia. After the death of Father Daniel, Elder Kalinikos became renowned as a man of discernment and unceasing prayer. He continued to the rule of his elder and eventually was joined for a time by Elder Gerasim Menangias in chapter 10, who totally absorbed the spirit of his elder. Father Kalinikos was then joined by Father Christodoulos, who reposed in our own day in 1982, there in Katanakia. Elder Gerasim dwelt thereafter in St. Basil's Skeet, employing his broad education, wielded a great influence on his generation, who through him took great interest in the life of the Athonite Elders. Father Maximos, a disciple of Elder Gerasim, still dwells in St. Basil's Skeet, which has remained for many years a stronghold for Orthodox zealots. 9. The Russian Athonites. At the time when the Philokalia came off the press in Venice in 1782, St. Paisios Velichkovsky was living in Moldavia. He had by then already translated nearly all of the 32 books contained in this anthology into Slavonic, as well as many of the full-length spiritual classics. His disciples began to return to their respective provinces within the Russian realm in 1779, 1787, and above all in 1801. This was a result of successive reforms relaxing those measures which had been issued in 1724 and 1764 to liquidate monasteries. They returned to a changing spiritual world. The Slavonic edition of the Philokalia, patterned after the newly printed Greek original, became available in 1793, and by the turn of the century, many monasteries, including Valam, Serov, and Kornevets, were flourishing once again. Fugitive hermits took refuge in these revived citadels and shared openly the wealth they had gathered in secret. Monasteries in central Russia, such as White Bluff, and others, began growing rapidly at this time, under the influence of the disciples of Paisios. In 1821, Fathers Anthony and Moses settled in the newly established Optina Skeet, initiating an important new era in Orthodox monasticism. The effects of these events cannot be underestimated. Tens of thousands of young men, desiring clearer knowledge of God and the meaning of the Orthodox life, came to these monasteries, which had become centers for the dissemination of hesychasm and prayer of the heart, and looked to Mount Athos as the fount of this experience. Travelers, too, such as Barsky and Father Parthenios, were returning home with tales confirming all that they had previously heard concerning the living transmission of Orthodox experience through God-bearing Holy Fathers, as well as tidings of many vacant kelia, surrounding huts and crumbling monasteries that abounded all over the Holy Mountain. Young monastic aspirants, such as the future Elder Arsenios, Abbot Paul, Father Anicetus, and Elders Jerome and Macarius arrived on Mount Athos by the 1830s, and each year more came. Except for brief gaps during the confrontations with Turkey and the Napoleon War, this movement became an endless stream. By 1840, the Russians on Mount Athos had become too numerous for the hermitages in Kelia, and required a monastery where they might gather and have services in common in their own tongue. Monks from the Russian Empire, drawn by accounts of the spiritual feats of Athonite monks, now filled St. Pantaleimon Monastery. But this too proved to be inadequate, and they overflowed into several other monasteries throughout most of the northwestern sector of the peninsula, in the area around the New Thebaid and Kromitsa. St. Elias Skeet came to house more than 500 monks. The Kapsala region on the eastern side of the peninsula around Keries was full of Russian faces, and their foreign tongue became almost as common as Greek. Throughout the fertile Provada, in the clearings and in the woods, many cells were constructed, and eventually a large segment of the southern desert became populated with Slavic ascetics. In the latter part of the 19th century, as a consequence of the monastic surge in the Russian homeland, a small abode named after the Apostle Andrew, hardly more than a stone's throw from the village of Keries, was enlarged to immense proportions and filled with nearly 1,000 monks. Among the many distinguished personalities who labored in the monastic life at this time were gifted writers, such as the hero monk Seraphim, monk Pantaleimon, and monk Danasius, the last two of whom bequeathed to us many priceless portraits of monastic life as it really was, up until the Russian Revolution. They provided accurate accounts of righteous men who lived at the same time or preceded by a generation the elders about whom Father Cherubim has written. 10. 20th century Athos. The spiritual legacy of Mount Athos continues down to our own day. Father Cherubim was only able to write about a limited number of these grace-filled fathers. While English-speaking readers are well acquainted with St. Silouan of Mount Athos and St. Savas the New of Kalymnos, few know as well other ascetics, such as the Holy 12, Elder George of Hilandari, Elder Theodosius of Corulia, Elder Avacum of the Lavra, the righteous fathers of the Romanian Skeets, Elder Michael the Blind of St. Anne's Skeet, and St. Joseph the Cave Dweller. The spiritual progeny of this last ascetic have multiplied many times over, and at the present time now occupy the monasteries of Dionysiou, Zeraputamu, Philotheu, Constantinitou, and as of 1988, the monastery of Vatopedi. Within the last 20 years, some other monasteries on the Holy Mountain have experienced a resurgence of activity due, on the one hand, to the arrival of close-knit brotherhoods from outside the monastic peninsula, while others have blossomed anew due to the spiritual leadership and guidance of their present abbot. In light of the obvious increase in numbers of monks and the improvement in the physical appearances of the edifice, credit must be given to far-seeing and gifted men like Father Cherubim and other eloquent expositors of this age-old encounter between God and man. At the same time, however, the question of the deeper spiritual health of these monasteries remains to be revealed and will unfold in its own time. Such a note of caution needs to be made before the face of issues which must be confronted by the monastic prophets, if there be any, of our day. Specifically, where may One here critical censure of the introduction and use of telephones, duplicity in regard to the church calendar, the opening of roads, and the daily use of large trucks, when for the silent ones a mule was able to suffice, the expulsion and persecution of the zealots, the clear-cutting of forests, tacit approval of the vagaries of the patriarch, the unilateral use of electricity and toxic pesticides, through all of which armies of invisible spiritual termites have gained a foothold within the very foundations of the Athonite monastic life. It is this framework of monastic life, based in principle on an initial renunciation of the way in which the world thinks, which has long supported and aided the perennial quest for direct contact with the person of Jesus Christ. It is this framework which now has become so fragile precisely by the lack of continuity with the fathers portrayed in contemporary ascetics of Mount Athos. Hence the value and urgency to have an intimate awareness and awe before their genuine, unaffected way of life. There is enough holy data provided by Father Cherubim in these lives to paint the scene of spiritual activity, but in order to keep the reader uplifted, many details have been omitted. These can be found, for the most part, in the standard books on Mount Athos, while setting the record straight concerning the opposition of the Athonite Elders to the libertine modernism of myriad career-minded clergymen in this century. Many significant details that the reader might wish to know are simply not provided. The fact concerning the exile of Father Joachim to the Isle of Skopelos in the late 30s, the events surrounding the deposition of Archimandrite Athanasius in the 20s, the letter of Elder Daniel on ecclesiastical reform, the prominence of Elders Callinicus and Ignatius in the Zealot movement in the 20s, the severe coercion applied on the Athonite monasteries by the Ecumenical Patriarchate. In the lifetime of Father Savas, during Russian-Turkish hostilities, and the more recent rift in the Zealot communities in recent years are events and issues which Father Cherubim chose to gloss over lightly. While describing the servants of God of truth, the author perhaps deemed these as painful wounds whose scars are yet too tender to disturb, or perhaps deemed them to be mere ripples obscuring the placid water of the harbor of faith, and he elected instead to direct our gaze toward the God who is wondrous in his saints. Originally intended for a Greek-speaking audience, this work is one of the finest Orthodox literature about Mount Athos to have appeared in the English language. It has great importance for evoking a sense of beauty among lovers of God today. There is an inner beauty and goodness in these simple portraits which our English-speaking authors have been unable to offer for many years, as well as a depth of spiritual knowledge foreign to these very authors. These are not the lost and lonely men of American prose, but mighty contemporary heroes, men of beauteous soul, who, after the passage of 20 centuries, still find in a fresh way the meaning of life in their redemption by Jesus Christ. The author does not press upon the reader dry platitudes about the relationship between faith and reason. Indeed, every abstract concept pertaining to the spiritual life that he sets forth is visibly illustrated in the daily life of these men. The most exalted teachings on asceticism and the vision of God are seen practically applied in the persons of these new luminaries, stars in our midst, gentle and heedful of the needs of others. Contemporary ascetics of Mount Athos for many years will endure in the English language as the most endearing literature on Mount Athos. Many other books, including the 3 excellent studies by Dr. Constantine Kavarnos, offer intensive insight and rare information, but transmit little of the actual daily experience and the feel of the Athonite ascetics. Many travelogues, too, offer us dated pictures of how a monastic community functions. They are unable, however, to tell us what the soul of each man can and should experience. The great value of reading about the lives of these elders is that they disclose the paradise open today to mortals, and the most loving God who stretches forth his hands to embrace his sons, returning to him, at this 11th hour. It is the publisher's wish that the hesitant reader may make such a resolve, to enter before the doors to the bride chamber close, nevermore to open. Signed, Monk Gerasim Eliel, July 14th/27, 1992, Feast of St. Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain. A note about the author. The author of Contemporary Ascetics of Mount Athos, Archimandrite Cherubim Karambelas, was born in 1920 and given the name George. Before his birth, he lost his father to Greece's war with Turkey in Asia Minor, and his place in George's life was taken by his uncle. Under this uncle's protection, he received a severe, even harsh upbringing. He was 14 years old when a love and longing for monastic life and Mount Athos was kindled in his heart by the descriptions of two Athonite monks, Elders Paisios and Chrysanthus. Despite the disapproval and punitive reactions of his mother and uncle, the seed of inspiration then planted blossomed 4 years later into a firm resolution to spend the rest of his life as a monk on Mount Athos, the holy mountain. With this intent, in August of 1938, the 18-year-old George secretly boarded a ship which would dock at Daphne, the port of the holy mountain, on its way to Thessaloniki. Arriving at last on the sacred peninsula, he visited various places: the capital, Keriez, St. Anne's Skeet, Kavsokalivia, the Romanian Skeet of St. John the Forerunner, the Great Lavra, and Dionysiu Monastery. Although he was strongly drawn to the last-named monastery, and especially to one of its virtuous older monks, the elder Lazarus, he decided to join the huts of St. Anne's Skeet, that of the Nativity of the Theotokos. Its strict yet loving elder Gregory and holy brethren, one of whom, Elder Joachim, would be the subject of the first volume of Contemporary Ascetics of Mount Athos, provided exactly the conditions his young, ardent, and simple soul required: rigorous demands and expectations joined with abundant personal attention to his spiritual advancement, and shining examples of sanctity everywhere before his eyes. The chapters in his book, Recollections of Mount Athos, footnote, Recollections of Mount Athos by Archimandrite Cherubim, Holy Cross Orthodox Press, Brookline, Massachusetts, 1987. This book, deeply moving and inspiring, is also indicative of the difficulty of translating Father Cherubim's writing into English, a difficulty caused in part by inherent limitations in the modern English language. His style, which in Greek is both exalted and touchingly childlike, is not well conveyed by a literal or direct translation. Some skill is required for it, neither to lose the author's special quality nor to sound stilted. The translator of Contemporary Ascetics of Mount Athos begs the reader's pardon for lapses into either fault. To continue, the chapters in his book, Recollections of Mount Athos, devoted to his life in this hut and descriptions of its inhabitants, are among the most moving in the whole book. As this book shows, George's pure soul received vivid, undistorted impressions of the holy monks he met and the profound scenes he witnessed on the holy mountain, which remained with him for the rest of his life as a source of spiritual nourishment. He was deeply sensitive to the spiritual significance of what he saw, and his talent of description and interpretation enabled him to transmit it to others. When novice George had lived in St. Anne's Skeet for over 2 years, he was tonsured to the great schema and named Cherubim, after a hesychist of St. Basil's Skeet, whom he greatly venerated. The tonsure service took place in the cave of St. Athanasios on October 14th, 1940. Despite his intent to live on Mount Athos for the rest of his life, Father Cherubim was forced by an acute illness to leave the holy mountain in October of 1942 and settle in Athens. He was to return only once, several years later, to visit Elder Joachim on his deathbed. He eventually became the founder of the holy monastery of the Paraclete in Oropos, a little outside of Athens, in which he instituted a strict Athonite typikon. He served as the abbot of this monastery until his death on August 22nd, 1979. This monastery publishes Orthodox books which are among the most profitable, accessible, and inspiring in Greece today. Several of these are Greek translations of Russian spiritual classics. The present abbot of Father Timothy is half Russian. These books are wholly penetrated with the leaven of genuine Orthodox spirituality. They are blossoms grown from the seed of Athonite monasticism, which fell on the good earth of young Father Cherubim's soul during his relatively short residence on the Holy Mountain. Although for the rest of his life his soul yearned for the Athos he remembered so vividly and lovingly, it was surely by God's dispensation and for our great profit that he remained where he could spread its ideals to others, both in the monastery he founded and by his publications. It is our hope that these books, which are now beginning to appear in English, will bear fruit worthy of the ideals that they convey. Preface. Mount Athos is a special land, halfway between heaven and earth. For the past 1,300 years it has been set apart from all other earthly countries, and its way of life does not conform to worldly standards. It is inhabited by men who are not satisfied by all that the world has to offer. They seek something more than the material world and beyond earthly beauty. To find it, they have journeyed to Mount Athos, where earth ceases and heaven begins. By means of patient endurance and supernatural struggles, they have found there what they were seeking, and they embrace it as a great treasure. It is a treasure they long to keep to the end of their lives, for they have truly found a piece of heaven. On the Holy Mountain, men follow a new way of life that gives a foretaste of future blessedness. Their souls are inspired by the thought of eternity, which like an ever-flowing spring encourages and comforts them when life is hard and difficult. Wonderstruck by the athletes who have fought in the arena of Mount Athos, the author longs to share the wonder with those who have not had the privilege of meeting them personally. This series, The Contemporary Ascetics of Mount Athos, is meant to bring to light some of the hidden spiritual athletes who shone on Mount Athos in the first half of the 20th century. Some of them chose to stay on the Holy Mountain to the very end of their lives, while others, after many years of labor, chose to take their ministry to the outside world. All of them serve to assure contemporary orthodoxy that even in our times there exist heroes who fight the great spiritual battle. At the same time, may this book be accounted as a fruit of the deep gratitude of the writer to those humble and holy fathers who have granted and continue to grant to him so many priceless gifts. At this time, when the first volume of the series is being put into circulation, it is only these beloved and unforgettable figures who grant him strength and consolation, although they are now so very far away. Signed, Archimandrite Cherubim, June 1968. Chapter 1. Elder Joachim of St. Anne's Skeet. I cannot describe what I saw before me: a missionary, an exemplary disciple, an untiring ascetic, a confessor, an apologist of the faith, one who loved God with all his soul, and with all his heart, and with all his strength, and with all his understanding. Mark 12:30. Archimandrite Cherubim. Part 1. His first journey in ministry. 1. His roots. Father Joachim was born in Kalamata in 1895 to a pious family, and was known in the world as John Nicolaides. He graduated from the grade school and the gymnasium in his village. Although an active boy, he began to seek God in his youth. He wanted to know him, delight in him, and live in him fully. It was for this reason that his thirsting soul discovered Elias Panagoulakis. Panagoulakis was a strict faster who lived in a cave not far from Kalamata. His amazing conversion from the darkness of sin to the light of Christ, his lively sermons and personal discussions, all accented by the brilliance of his ascetic life, created a spiritual movement in Kalamata singular for its time. Hidden in his simple words was the seed of life, which stirred the depths of people's hearts. And this was not because of his learning, he was almost uneducated, but because his fiery sermons were based on true and actual experience. But we will take things in order and recount briefly the life and personality of Elias Panagoulakis, as taken from the antidotes of Archimandrite Joel Yiannakopoulos. And the reader would ask your patience and forbearance in the pronunciation of difficult Greek surnames and other technical terms of Athonite language. He was born in Kalamata in 1873. He received little education, only learning how to read and write. Until the age of 30, he played musical instruments and kept a tavern near the Church of St. Nicholas. All the idlers and vagrants of the city gathered there. He was their leader, had a strong influence over them. Thus he lived a wanton and dissipated life, respecting nor fearing anyone. In 1902, one of his close friends died. Panagoulakis went to the funeral and paid close attention to the divine service. The phrase, quote, is passed from death to life, John 5:24, disquieted him, and with trepidation he asked the church wardens if there is another life after death. Being pious men, they catechized him in the truths of the Holy Orthodox faith. Panagoulakis was already a prisoner of divine grace. Terrified by his former prodigality, he went to a priest, hieromonk Glamanos of the Valandia monastery, and confessed his sins with contrition, resolving to lead an exemplary Orthodox life in the future. Afterwards he sold all the assets of his tavern, covered his room with black curtains. He visited those whom he had wronged in the past, asked their forgiveness on his knees, and redressed his injustices. Finally, he made the decision to live as an ascetic. He first traveled to Mani, where he remained for a few months. Then he returned to Kalamata and settled in a cell near the chapel of St. Anne. A little later, he moved to another cell, near the city cemetery. There, without being Tantrata monk, he lived for 15 years in harsh asceticism, fasting, and prayer. He abstained completely from meat, fish, eggs, and milk, and he ate only on Saturdays and Sundays. On Wednesdays and Fridays, he ate absolutely nothing. He had no bed, but slept a very little on a board on the ground. Since other youths, attracted by his example, began to come to live with him, he built a few more small cells with the monetary aid of pious Christians. The doors of these cells were so narrow that one could only enter sideways. Every Sunday on the Lord's Day and every feast day, a throng of Orthodox gathered in Panagoulakis' hermitage, and he preached the word of God to them. In the simple building where he preached hung a human skeleton, serving as a continual reminder to the listeners of the vanity of this world. Panagoulakis' sermons were simple and artless, but they came from a heart burning with love for Christ, and they regenerated a multitude of souls. This uneducated ascetic had young disciples. When they grew up, became great laborers of the gospel. Such were Archimandrite Joel Yiannakopoulos, whose blessed repose in 1966, Archimandrite Chrysostomos, reposed 1972, and many others. Such was the attractive power of Panagoulakis' simple words that the army commander of Kalamata forbade the soldiers to go to his hermitage, since going there in mass and influenced by his preaching, they would refuse to be served food cooked with oil on fast days. Panagoulakis had not yet passed his 45th year when he was attacked by a serious form of tuberculosis. He reposed in the Lord in January of 1917, leaving behind many spiritual children and the renown of a holy man. John Nicolaides, the future Elder Joachim, therefore had the blessing of being the disciple of such a man of God during his difficult adolescent years. Thus strong spiritual foundations were laid for him at the proper time, and his future weighty edifice of sanctity could rest on them safely. How truly precious they were to him in the very next stage of his life. When he had finished the gymnasium, John journeyed to America. The various idols of materialism were at their peak, but the young student had learned much, especially that he must not worship an alien god. The shaping of his character and education, which continually broadened during his studies in the American schools, was not a hindrance to his firm belief in the God of his fathers. John's main occupation was spiritual growth and continuous study, and his intelligence and untiring devotion made him excel in all things. Along with this, however, he offered his services to the spiritual work of the Metochian of the All-Holy Sepulchre, to which Bishop Panteleimon was the exarch. He found there a center for spiritual renewal. 2. A calling to serve God. The conduct and behavior of John Nicolaides inspired the respect and wonder of Bishop Panteleimon. Many parishes knew of the dynamic preacher who, in spite of his youth, stirred their souls. It was a great joy of the Greeks in the area to see John ascending to the Ambo. At one visit to the Metochian, an auspicious one in John's life, the bishop approached him and said, "My son, I have long heard a voice within me prompting me to ask you about your career. Today I cannot hold back. Please tell me, what do you have in mind for the future? Do you have other ideas, or is it your intention to give yourself to God? Do you suppose that the Lord might be calling you to his vineyard? Could he have destined you to be a servant of his glory?" John lowered his head. These questions shook him, and he cried, "Your Grace, I desire that very much, but I don't dare to even think about it. My spiritual teacher in Kalamata taught me that it is sinful for a man to think of such matters on his own account, because of human unworthiness and weakness. Only if God calls a soul through circumstances beyond his control, only then must he obey with fear." The pious bishop once again stood in awe of John. He saw the wealth of his great soul. He could not contain himself in front of such a revelation, and arose from his chair greatly moved. "My son, God calls you through me to hasten to serve him." But John was silent. He seemed disturbed. He hesitated and was at a loss. He could only thank the bishop, ask for his prayers, and promise that he would see him again to discuss the matter. From that day on, John began a period of great struggles and intense prayer. Those who knew him then remember his trials and his entreaties, that they remember him in their prayers. A long time passed before John dared to visit Bishop Panteleimon. One day he was summoned by the bishop to come to him as soon as possible. Fearfully, he went to meet him. "You're late in answering me, and I am anxious," said the bishop. "Your Grace," answered John decisively, "only if the Holy Spirit perseveres in announcing this to you will I obey your summons. By myself, I dare not decide. A priest must be called by God or by men, but never by himself. My spiritual father in Greece made a special point of this." The bishop considered John's wise apprehensions. He stood in front of his desk and said with a stern voice, "Next Sunday I will ordain you a deacon." There was no room for argument. According to God's plan, Bishop Panteleimon was the man who led the pious youth to the path of the clergy. The bishop gave John a fatherly embrace and his blessing. By the parishioners, the bishop's announcement was received with great joy and excitement. On Sunday, the church of the Metochian of the All-Holy Sepulchre was full of Greeks from all the parishes where John preached. The thundering response of Axios and the enthusiasm of the congregation was a rare phenomenon among the Greeks in America, especially at that time. Father Joachim, as John was named in his monastic tonsure, was later elevated to the rank of priest by the same bishop. And that is how the pious youth was armed with the grace of the priesthood. 3. Missionary labors. The whole Greek community was inspired by the imposing and saintly presence of Father Joachim, his living faith, and his fiery sermons. Many souls found their way to salvation through his strong guiding hands. His love and deep respect for orthodoxy and its traditions were strongly rooted. They were his riches and his strength, a golden net in the hands of an experienced fisherman. Americans of other religions sought him out to learn orthodox thought from this pure representative of his faith. He was a worthy representative for the faithful of his area. The Patriarchate of Jerusalem awarded Father Joachim the Medallion of the All-Holy Sepulchre for his strict devotion and selflessness and for exceptional work in the apostolic mission. The following incident is an example of the kind of impression he made. He once took a bus. The passengers were immediately impressed by his appearance, by his priest's clothes, his full beard, so foreign to America. A crowd surrounded him and a discussion began. Father Joachim didn't lose his opportunity. Speaking in English, he told them that God and orthodoxy are alive and that man can live in God. In the meantime, the crowd increased, and traffic and pedestrians stopped moving. Finally, the police arrived and asked Father Joachim to stop his sermon. The crowd asked him to continue. Some time passed before he was able to finish this unique interview and return to the Metochion. He had revealed the greatness of his beloved orthodoxy and given drink to a thirsty crowd. He worked continuously in the vineyard of the Lord, and divine grace guided him to rich crops in his tiring and varied labors. There are men now grown old who still remember Father Joachim's teachings with love. A certain immigrant from Sparta saw and heard him for the first time. He was so impressed by Father Joachim that he didn't think it possible that he had been born and lived like other men. It was understandable, for the face of Father Joachim led one to believe that he had more in common with the angelic world. The intensity of his ministry began to impair his health. He felt continually weak. Before each sermon and liturgy, he had to take injections. His doctors suggested that he leave America and go to Greece for a rest, because his condition was getting steadily worse. But Father Joachim, faithful to the end, was determined to stay and minister to his flock, even though it might cost him his life. God, however, had other plans. He wanted to glorify him in other fields. After the establishment in 1930 of the American Archdiocese by the Ecumenical Patriarch, Archbishop Damascene was chosen to preside as president. At the time, he was Metropolitan of Corinth and later Archbishop of Athens. Bishop Panteleimon, the exarch of the All-Holy Sepulchre Metochion, was summoned to the Patriarchate of Jerusalem. With the blessing of the bishop, Father Joachim returned to Greece. After some time spent in Piraeus and Athens, he journeyed to the citadel of monasticism, the Holy Mountain. The vision of monastic life strongly beckoned him. Part 2. In the Garden of the Mother of God. 1. To Kafsokalivia. Here closed one page of Father Joachim's life, that of missionary labors in the world, blessed with bountiful harvests. Another page opened as Father Joachim struggled to adjust to the hard life of a monk on Mount Athos. After a period of fruitful activity, his restless soul sought to find peace in silence, and Hezekiah, tranquility, to live continuously with his Lord. He sought it with longing and set aside every hindrance. His difficulties were no trifles. His sickly body, his Greek-American culture, and his refined and aristocratic lifestyle, they were obstacles for him. But he was not disheartened. He was encouraged by the heroic army of saints who went before him, who were destitute, afflicted, tormented, wandering in the deserts and mountains and caves and dens of the earth. Hebrews 11:37-38. For his abode, he chose the strict and isolated skeet of Kafsokalivia, in the southern end of the Holy Mountain. This skeet lies spread out in a dramatic, narrow, rocky landscape which slopes steeply down to the untamed open sea of the northern Aegean. It is named after the great ascetic of the 14th century, Saint Maximus, called Kafsokalivia, or hut burner, since he constantly changed his dwelling place, and at every move burned his old straw huts. St. Maximus spent a long period of his ascetic life in the cave of Kafsokalivia. Several monks, his disciples and admirers, gathered around him, attracted by the silence and the wildness of the landscape. Later, St. Nephon, 15th century, and St. Akakios, 18th century, lived in asceticism in the same place. The latter lived for many years in St. Maximus's cave, and by his prayer opened a spring, which transformed the arid skeet into a fruitful garden. These holy figures were deciding influences on Father Joachim's resolve to remain in harsh Kafsokalivia, despite his being accustomed to American comfort and ease. Here he met many true monks in whom he saw incarnate a continual forcing of nature and uninterrupted guarding of the senses, in the words of St. John of the Ladder. These encounters gave him wings. He followed the Father's way of life without any deviations, striving to adapt himself to it. His surviving contemporaries have not forgotten his simple and humble life. He ran to the other fathers for counsel, like a small child, and systematically evaded the preeminence they ceded to him in the divine liturgy. In the long vigils, they say he was like an unshakable pillar. It was in Kavsokalivia that he met Father Gregory, a monk from the holy monastery of Constantinitu, who led a hesychast's life in that desert. He was a man of strong will, and with thorough knowledge of monastic life. He was somewhat educated, having served in the army. In the world, he had been an officer, which helped him to acquire strictness in character and discipline when he first started his monastic life. Well, Father Joachim attached himself to this austere and punctilious monk, becoming his disciple, together with 2 other faithful students who had followed him from America, the future monks Stephen and Paisios. They were unable to separate themselves from their spiritual father and brother. However, Father Gregory's hut was too small for them all, and the 4 of them had to find another place. 2. In the Skeet of St. Anne. A more suitable abode was found for Elder Gregory, Father Joachim, and the 2 brothers. The huts of the Nativity of the Mother of God in St. Anne's Skeet, on the western side of Mount Athos. It was a very picturesque setting, full of beauty and serenity, like almost every corner of Mount Athos. John Deminos, in his Pilgrim's Journal, described the Skeet as he saw it in the beginning of the 18th century, and as Father Joachim saw it almost unchanged when he arrived there 200 years later. To quote, "The cells of the pious and virtuous ascetics, which are near the main church of St. Anne, are in a precipitous place difficult to traverse. In number they exceed 60, the ascetics having very many chapels there also. The hermits and ascetics dwelling there live by the work of their hands. Some are calligraphers, some bookbinders, some chanters, while others, they carve panagias and holy crosses. Others sew kalimavkas, others make ladles, and others prayer ropes. And by these means they feed themselves, being furthermore occupied in prayer, and passing their lives in fasting and pains and much hardship. They gather every Sunday and serve liturgy together in the Kyriakon, the main church, and converse with each other, asking about soul-profiting matters and virtuous actions, and answering with piety and humility and brotherly love. And thus each one departs to his own cell." End quote. Well, it was natural that such a radiant spiritual community would be a nursery of saints, who by their ascetic lives sanctified the sacred grounds of the Skeet of the Foremother of God. St. Anne's Skeet has raised up 16 named saints, the first being its founder, St. Gerontius, 11th century, and the last, the newly revealed wonder worker, St. Sava the New, reposed April 7th, 1948. Besides these, however, there have been many other holy and ascetic monks, known and unknown. Even in Father Joachim's time, this corner of the garden of the Panagia was filled with flourishing plants laden with spiritual fruit. Such blessed fathers were Father Theodosius the Confessor, reposed 1950, a sober, judicious, taciturn man of high spiritual stature. Before he came to St. Anne's Skeet, he had lived in the desert cultivating noetic prayer. When serving divine liturgy, he was exalted, yet sober and self-controlled. He was a good converser and full of kindness and love in his dealings with others. He was a strong pillar for the Skeet. Father Theodosius's nights, the time of his canona, his prayer rule, were passed in sighings and tears. He was like a nocturnal bird, seeking God's mercy with mourning and lamentation. His desire and prayer was to finish his life on the holy mountain, in his own hut. This wish was fulfilled. When he was away once from the holy mountain, he fell seriously ill from hepatitis. Foreseeing his death approaching, he demanded that his friends move him to the mountain, disregarding the doctor's oppositions. "I have lived more than 50 years on the holy mountain," he said, "and I want to die there." The fathers carried him up from the Skeet harbor to his hut on a stretcher. There he lived 1 month longer, and finally, after thanking God with his whole heart, he gave up his spirit into his hands. Elder Victorian was another blessed man full of natural simplicity. Wherever he happened to be, he would pray in a loud voice, whether walking along the footpaths in the church or in the meetings with others. "Save me, my Panagia, save me! Have mercy on me!" His voice expressed pain and anguish, as from a wounded breast. The question of salvation occupied him constantly, causing him spiritual grief. When he met someone on the road after saying, "Evelogite, bless," he would ask in his heavy Rumelian accent, for he came from the parts of Karpenisi, "What do you say, Father? Will we be saved?" He said nothing else. Nothing else occupied him. "Save me, my Panagia," he begged, and his tears ran in rivers. "Don't let me be lost. For the love of thy Son, I came here as a child. Save me, my Panagia, save me." He prayed in the same way until his repose, mourning and lamenting. His death was the death of a saint, a hero of compunctionate prayer. Father Gabriel Cartsonas, who reposed in 1956, lived with his blood brothers, Father Seraphim, Dionysios, and Chrysostomos. All four were children of the mayor of Messene, and they preserved the nobility of their upbringings all their lives. They were distinguished as much for the austerity and strictness of their monastic life as for their Abraham-like hospitality and inexhaustible love for all. They were exceptional iconographers, known in all of Greece, but they never sacrificed their monastic principles for the sake of their large acquaintance. Other fathers, contemporaries of Father Joachim, were Father Leonidas the Confessor, reposed 1938, who devoted himself to, quote, unceasing prayer, almsgiving, spiritual or material assistance to any brother whomsoever, in any hour of the 24. Elder Eutherius, reposed 1933, who observed constant vigils, fasts, and severe asceticism, was counted worthy before his repose to see angel-like youths in white Philonians who announced to him his departure to eternity. The ascetic elder Andrew the Faster, reposed 1934, who ate only a little dry bread and a few fava beans, and was endowed with the divine gifts of purity and unceasing prayer, continual repentance, and ever-flowing tears. The grace-filled and discerning, pure and simple, pious, and traditional-loving Father Nicander the Confessor, reposed 1938, who from his excessive asceticism suffered cirrhosis of the liver and was reposed in terrible pain, seeing, however, angels and saints welcoming him into the kingdom of heaven. Elder Harlambos, in 1945, reposed, who was distinguished for his asceticism, his inexhaustible charity, his unceasing prayer, his piety, and before all, his constant memory of death, and who was vouchsafed the gift of visions in the last years of his life. Elder Nicodemus the Cypriot, who reposed in 1960, a model of love, kindness, and charity, counted worthy of the gift of prophecy. And the list goes on and on. These were heavenly men and earthly angels, emulators of the holy saints, and spiritual children of the glorious Foremother of God An, mother of the mother of monks, Our Lady the Theotokos, and ever Virgin Mary. Footnote, these quotations from St. Anne's are from St. Anne's Skete, the Holy Altar of Athos, published in Greek by hieromonk Antimos in Athens in 1986. To continue. To this skete, therefore, came Elder Gregory and his disciples, and settled in the huts of the Nativity of the Theotokos. It was a blessed community, which later the author also joined. There they all strove to submit entirely to the will of God, mortifying their own will. The ascetical collection of huts where the four monks settled was in the uppermost part of the skete. Climbing up to it is a painful trial for one's feet and breath, and especially difficult for one's heart. Only to look up at the huts of the Nativity of the Mother of God from the seashore makes one discouraged and giddy. How many unseasoned pilgrims would dare to make the climb to the skete, hauling on their backs every provision needed for their care, and not only for 1 or 2 days, but for all their lives? A hard battle awaited Father Joachim. Like an athlete practicing before his fight, he sought to be as light as possible. He was resolved to rid himself of every burden, however precious and costly. He wanted to keep one thing only: hope of the crown of victory. Therefore, Father Joachim asked Father Gregory to be relieved of the burden of the priesthood, and especially of all the ecclesiastical responsibilities he was forced to carry on in America. Quote, "There are priests and saints here. I don't consider myself worthy to stand next to them. I came here only to become a simple monk," he said humbly. Seeing his tears, Father Gregory was deeply moved. Free at last from his heavy burden, Father Joachim came to the abbot of the Skeet. In front of the holy and wonder-working icon of St. Anne, he delivered over his Archimandrite's cross, along with 2 citations, one from the Patriarch of Jerusalem and the other from the American government. He later gave away all of his new and expensive clothes, which distinguished him from the other fathers. He clothed himself in a humble and simple Athonite rasa and scufo and threw himself into the Christ-like struggle of his ascetic life. His heart was not daunted by the steep path to the Skeet, nor by the all-night vigils, the lack of sleep, or the meager monastic food. With his sickly body, he was not daunted even by the strict fasting. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, he would eat only once a day and without oil. During the great fasts, he would fast even more and remain many times without eating at all. His heroic soul embraced his new life with joy, almost as if he had been born for it. 3. The cross of obedience. In the hierarchy of values of his new life, Father Joachim placed obedience to his elder first. He understood that on the road of monastic life, he needed first of all to find an experienced guide to whom he could give himself completely. All his acts, thoughts, and desires must be under the complete scrutiny of the elder. From the moment he became his disciple, every evening he would come to the elder and discuss the problems and conditions of his inner life, and whatever happened during the course of the day. Difficulties, temptations, and upheavals are the daily lot of a monastic. It is the natural road of every soul who struggles to reach dispassion and contemplation, or theoria. It is like passing between Scylla and Charybdis and the infinite shoals and obstacles. Many times when we discussed our monastic struggles, Father Joachim would say, "Without daily confession of thoughts, a monk will never learn how to fight and be victorious." Many times I saw him leaping for joy when he came out of the elder's cell. In spite of his wan and sickly face, he was always cheerful and content. For Father Joachim, the elder, Father Gregory came right after God. He tried to anticipate anything the elder wished and to accomplish it in the best manner. This he practiced not only in theory, but also in deed. Being sickly and frail, he became so extremely tired and weak after working that he had to hug the walls to reach his cell. When the elder assigned him some difficult task, he performed it so meekly that we were astonished. Those scenes of him are unforgettable. Many times we were amazed and moved to tears by his sacrifices. I shall describe some incidences which I keep as rich treasures in my memory. In October of 1939, Father Joachim was in charge of gathering olives for our huts, a labor in which we all took part. We worked from morning to night, in silence and prayer, as always. With the setting of the sun, we set off to read Vespers. After that, we wanted to rest a little before going to matins at 1 in the morning, and then once again resuming harvesting the olives. As we returned, we had to support Father Joachim, who was so tired he couldn't stand on his feet. When we arrived at the grove by our huts, we were told it was our turn to press the olives. That meant we had to spend the whole night pressing the olives we'd gathered. "Go ahead and start. The others will come shortly," the elder was heard to say to Father Joachim. To start the olive mill, we had to push the wheel to turn the stone that grinds the olives to pulp. We didn't use animals then. It was pure ascetic labor. "May it be blessed, Nainivligimeno." "Elder," he answered with astonishing eagerness. He made his prostration, received a blessing, and he went to push the millstone, walking along the footpath until we lost him among the trees of the Skeet. We were speechless. This was the man whom we had to hold up to walk. We implored the elder to send one of us with him in case he collapsed on the road. Why are you troubled? The elder asked, in his soldierly way. Don't you think that there are saints in our own time? Or have you forgotten that obedience makes the dead speak from their graves? You will see that God will give him strength for his self-sacrifice and obedience. Even he will be amazed. By the command of the elder, I soon went to the olive mill. I was astounded to see that weak and lean man turning the wooden spoke of the millstone with determination. How goes it, Father Joachim? I asked. What can I say? He replied. With the elder's blessing, I don't feel any great difficulty. I would just like to have some water to drink. I am very thirsty. He agreed to let me help. The work finished at daybreak when two other brothers replaced us. After midnight, Father Joachim retired to his cell by the elder's order. There were similar incidences during the 18 hard years at St. Anne's Skeet. I included 2 other episodes to give a complete picture of Father Joachim's self-denial. As was his habit, he discussed spiritual matters each night with Father Gregory. On one particular night, he knocked on his door and was asked to wait. Being tired, Father Joachim rested his head on the door and waited. Well, either the elder forgot he was there or he was testing him. He went to bed. On waking at midnight for matins, the elder found him still waiting outside. Why are you here at such an hour? He asked. When I knocked on the door yesterday, you told me to wait. The elder related that story to us with wonder. We praised God for giving such a man to our community. On another occasion, we had finished supper, were going to our cells. In front of everyone, the elder called Father Joachim. Get ready the lantern, the sack, and the walking staff. I want you to go to the lavra. You have to be there in the morning when they open. I want you to take care of a certain matter and return here at noon tomorrow. May it be blessed, elder, he said, and then prepared for his evening trip. The monastery of the Great Lavra is about 4 hours away from St. Anne's Skeet. But because he was so slow in walking, Father Joachim, he had to leave the night before. He was very tired, but having the chance to profit by obedience, he gained courage. He made a prostration and left. He went some distance, slowly making his way up the path to the monastery. When once again he had been tested for his courage and patience, the elder sent another brother to replace him and turn him back. By your prayers, Yeronda, I would have continued, but since you wished it, I have returned, he said when he came back. Father Joachim's obedience was characteristic of his whole personality. He crucified his self-will daily, in everything from details to serious matters, and he strove to inspire us with the same ideal as is shown by the following incident. Uncle John, the fisherman, he lived alone at the seashore by our skeet. He was from Mytilene. He wore a monastic scufo. He had a beard, long hair. He was more than 60 years old and lame, and he served the Holy Fathers. One day Uncle John brought us several pounds of fish. The elder thanked him and commanded that someone clean them outside of the huts so the sink wouldn't be filled with scales. Being the youngest, I immediately volunteered, but I hadn't considered the cold, which was so bitter that everything was frozen, and the tap only gave a little trickle of water. My hands froze and ached unbearably, and I was therefore forced to continue scaling the fish inside of our huts. Father Joachim saw me, came up to me and said, "Little one, why did you come inside?" "Father, I couldn't stand the frost in the cold water." But the elder commanded that the fish be cleaned outside of our huts. His command should be fulfilled without any contradiction or self-justification. Father Stephen, the willing and tireless servant of us all, heard the conversation. Losing no time, he came and picked up the basin of fish, and cheerfully and skillfully cleaned them all, disregarding the cold. His spiritual heroism and love are unforgettable to me. His hands were frozen. I looked at him, petrified, unable to utter a word in the face of his self-renunciation. A monk must die many times a day when obedience demands it, Father Joachim told me. Now you have lost the reward. Father Stephen took it all. 4. His relationship with God. Each day Father Joachim prayed without ceasing. Working or sitting, he managed to keep a continuous conversation with God. He would tell us with meekness, "If you take prayer away from a monk, then you take away his right to feel like a true son of God." Often he would come to us and in a fatherly way would ask if we did the Jesus prayer, or if we said the Akathist to the Mother of God. I rarely saw him speak, and then only when it was necessary, but I always saw him in prayer. For a quieter place he would go to a little forest behind our huts. There he would lift up his hands to heaven and for many hours continue in noetic communion with Jesus. When we asked him where he'd been, he would answer, "In the Garden of Gethsemane. That's where I was." Prayer delighted him so much that he considered food and even rest unnecessary. For a year he received a blessing from the elder to not go to his cell at night. He remained standing in the middle of the church of our hut. During that time, the brothers used to say that divine blessings and heavenly acts were manifested in the heart of Father Joachim. Many times they would hear his lamentations, and at other times his triumphant psalmodies. And when they saw him at matins, he was always fresh and cheerful, as if he had been sleeping soundly. His soul desired much, but his body could not keep up with it. He continued to weaken. During the period of his year's vigils and continuous standing, his legs began to ulcerate through poor circulation. The elder forbade him to continue the all-night vigils in the chapel. Then the brave warrior began another battle. In one corner of his cell, he wrapped himself in a woolen shawl and sat there all night with another heavy blanket. He never used a pillow. Only his legs were stretched out to relieve the ulcers. In that new all-night battle, he would pray. Occasionally, when he would shut his eyes in sleep, his lips continued to move in the prayer, "Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. Kyrie Jesu Christe eleison me." We always heard that prayer outside his cell. Numberless times when I happened to awake, I would hear the Jesus prayer and the Akathist to the Mother of God coming with feeling from the next cell, where he kept vigil, sitting like an earthly angel. I still remember that when he sang, "All Holy Trinity," and "Holy Trinity, our God, have mercy and save us," his whole body would shake with emotion. For him, I think there was no prayer more powerful. His respect for the Holy Trinity cannot be described. When during services we sang the Troparion to the Trinity, he immediately stood rigidly at attention. For him, the Lord's name was the sweetest of all words. Towards the Mother of God, he had great love and reverence. Many times during the day he would say the Akathist and would often counsel us, "Hold fast throughout your life to the robe of the Panagia, the Mother of God, and she will lead you to her Son." The prayers and hymns of the divine services, he said another time, is like a beautiful meadow, and anyone entering into it will never have the heart to leave. The fragrance from that meadow will linger with him all day long. It happened that all the brothers of our blessed community gathered to consider the subject of daily Holy Communion. We took the position of the Colavaris, a spiritual movement that embraced the monastic life and became beacons to our generation during the time of national war. The spiritual father of our brotherhood was Father Christopher, who led a hesychist's life at Corulia. He was a spiritual descendant of the Colavaris and had originally come from the monastery of Flammurion in Volos. That is how it was decided that the mystery of Holy Communion should be dispersed daily to our community and to Father Joachim. Often, when divine liturgy was not performed, our hearts sought the heavenly manna. Father Joachim, at the elder's command, would don his epitrachelion and, filled with joy and fear, would serve the bread of life to the brethren. The holy gifts were always in our church. Thus the presence of the Lamb of God filled the atmosphere of our small brotherhood with a special grace. 5. Enlightened guide in the spiritual life. The elder had entrusted our daily spiritual guidance to Father Joachim as his successor in the huts. He showed himself to be a wonderful and enlightened teacher. The elder often told me, "Little one, pay attention to Father Joachim. He is one of the few monks of our times who lives the monastic way of life consistently. When I first came to the huts, the elder told Father Joachim to settle me in, and since he cared about everyone, he came up to me, and like a trainer, he gave me my first directions. "Well, my child, a monk's cell is an arena. Here he has to fight with the devil and with his passions, and he must always be the victor. Then your guardian angel will rejoice, and the Lord will bless your struggles. So from here on, to paradise." A little later, when I was officially enrolled in our skeet's register, he took care to give me the basic principles of my new life, simply and briefly. A monk who omits his canona, his rule, who doesn't come to all the services, and who eats meat, cannot stand up and make progress. Learn to do the tasks you are assigned with good order and thoroughness. Measure each word and action by the criterion of your monastic identity. Speak like a monk. Look at things like a monk. Sit like a monk. Walk like a monk. Eat like a monk. Sleep like a monk. Think like a monk. Pray like a monk. Well, these were his own principles which he struggled to fulfill, and which he strove to inspire in us also. His love followed our every footstep. He used every opportunity to strengthen us. He was very courteous, but at the same time immovable in his principles. Since I was the youngest, they had assigned me manual tasks, washing the dishes, sweeping, etc. Father Joachim arranged every task with prudence and order. At the same time, he tried to make it a chisel, shaping our characters. Many times when I was washing the plates at the water faucet, and the winter was severe and my hands were stiff from the freezing water, he came up to me and said lovingly, "My little one, winter is bitter, but paradise is sweet." The hardship and pain would deliver us from our evil selves and from our passions. The words and presence of Father Joachim refreshed my young, struggling soul. Sometimes, however, no human consolation could strengthen me, and I felt no comfort. What truly goes on in the soul of a novice? What trials, struggles, temptations, and attacks of the devil come to hinder us in our course toward the angelic life? When novices struggle and conquer, they are the greatest heroes. That first year, I remember, I was in great difficulty when the time came to pick the olives. This task came during a period of intense struggle with my egoism, my old habits, and my sins. Every afternoon, I was tortured by unbearable headaches. In this condition, I besought the elder to let me do some other work. He readily agreed, and I was given the jobs of cooking and cleaning around the huts. When the blessed elder Joachim was informed by the elder of my request, he made a plan. The olive orchard was in the area of our cells. When there was no need for him to be there, he came to the hut and approached me discreetly, endeavoring to help me. At one such opportunity, he said to me, "So your head hurts, my little one. Go and take a little bit of oil from the lampada of the Panagia and anoint it with the sign of the cross, so the headache will go away. Go on, and also say the troparion of her nativity." "May it be blessed," I answered, and did as he told me. "Has the headache gone away now?" "No, Father." "Well, then it's not the head's fault, because our Panagia is our doctor here, and heals all our sicknesses. Maybe you should come and pick a few olives, even if just for half an hour, and then go back." At first I heard his suggestion with indifference. That evening, however, when I was revealing to the elder my thoughts of the day, I mentioned this incident also. "Go for half an hour, my child, so we'll be obedient to Father Joachim," the elder told me. The next day I set off with the other brothers to go to the olive orchard. A half hour had passed when Father Joachim, who in spite of his sickly constitution picked olives in the bitter cold, approached me and said, "How's your head, little one?" It's not hurting me. "In that case, stay for half an hour more and then go." When half an hour had passed, he asked me again, "Does it hurt at all?" "No, it's a strange thing," I said. "Good. Now go back to our cells and do your other obediences." Through the gentleness and love which characterized Father Joachim, I worked in the olive orchard for a month and a half without ever again being bothered by headaches. Here's another incident. On the upper floor of our huts there was a large sunroom from which you could see the whole skeet and the open sea. An abundance of light poured into it, and for this reason Father Joachim used it as an icon painting studio. I should mention here that he was a really good iconographer. He had learned icon painting in the Kathisma of St. Constantine belonging to the Great Lavra, and from this blessed work he secured a certain income for ourselves. Father Joachim was a refined soul. Beside the holy icons, he also designed and painted elegant keepsakes, which he gave away as a blessing to the pilgrims who came to our huts. At one time I also tried to become an iconographer. The blessed Father Joachim instructed me. I made my first drawings, several large eyes, mouths, noses, ears, etc. He never told me that any of them were ugly, but always encouraged me. In a few days I abandoned the attempt in spite of his encouraging words. Later I asked Father Joachim, "Why, Father, when I was making those absurd drawings, actually cartoons, did you tell me that they were well done?" "My little one, we should never discourage beginners. That's the educational principle I learned in a college in America. And when I came here, I met these same conclusions of psychology and educational theory, the fruit of many years of research by scientists, in our patristic books, which were mostly written by monks many centuries before. But these conclusions are not only written in books, but they're also put in practice, and that by elders who have little education, but much experience and praxis in teaching the monastic life. I've seen their application here on the Holy Mountain by today's monks." 6. His orderliness and gentleness of soul. The life of Father Joachim continued to unfold in a wonderful manner. It was apparent not only in his enlightened inner life, but in all of his habits, even though he passed through many difficulties. The order which prevailed in the cells by his initiative was characteristic. I once used a knife to cut a lemon, but didn't put it back in its place. Just then Father Joachim happened to pass by. "Did you use the knife?" "Yes," I answered. "Why did you leave it there? Pick it up immediately. Go, wash it well, dry it, and tell it, 'Thank you for its help.' Then put it in its place. There should be a place for everything you use, and everything in its place," he said. He once taught us a clever way to bring firewood from the garden to the house. Each time we passed the garden, we would haul back a piece of wood. Thus, without becoming especially tired or losing time in a gigantic effort to store wood, the pile grew slowly until there was sufficient firewood for the winter. His gentle manner and love were evident everywhere. He always showed equal warm love to both the brothers and the fathers of the skeet. Even if he had to change his routine, he was always ready to help a brother in need. These thoughts of his give an example of his gentleness and love toward visitors. If a visiting brother comes to our services, we must always give him the best place, especially at the kleros, to chant. And if he happens to make a mistake in the daily tone, for example, singing the plagal fourth or the third instead of the fourth, you who are in the left choir must not correct him for fear of embarrassing him. Let him correct himself. Love and respect are more important than the tone. He was a wise and discerning guide, lighting the way for us younger monks to follow. 7. His beard. We must not omit saying a few words about Father Joachim's rare and exceptional beard. When he lived in America, he observed with sorrow the modern spirit which had begun to affect even ecclesiastical matters. He saw priests who thought that they could function better in society if they departed from Orthodox tradition. In that worldly atmosphere, Father Joachim behaved courageously. He couldn't stand to see Orthodox priests taking off their precious rassos and cutting their hair and cutting their beards. It is worth noting that before being tonsured, he made the following prayer to the Mother of God. "Most Holy Theotokos, when I become a priest, please give me long hair and a beard so that I will look like the priests in my homeland." The Mother of God did not deny him his supplication, but fulfilled his desire abundantly. As we stated earlier, the Americans wondered at his imposing appearance and his long, full beard. When he finally journeyed to Mount Athos, an astonishing thing happened. His beard grew and lengthened all the way down to his legs, a phenomenon very rare, even in his fatherland. We attributed this to the prayer he made to the Mother of God. In order to move freely and restrain the remarks of others, he was forced to carry his beard in a sack tied around his neck. In his latter years, the fathers asked him to be photographed with his priestly vestments and beard. At first, he wouldn't do it, but after being asked a second time by the fathers, he gave in. The photograph was saved, and it can be seen at the end of the text. 7. The doctor's diagnosis. Day by day, Father Joachim increased in sanctity. At the same time, however, his outer man weakened. His health was not good. Against his wishes, Father Gregory sent for a doctor. The diagnosis was discouraging: tuberculosis. Death was surely a few months away unless he changed his diet. He had to eat meat, fish, and eggs. If they were not available there, it was of the utmost importance that he leave Mount Athos. The doctor ordered complete rest. Father Joachim heard all this calmly. When the doctor left, he addressed himself to his elder. "Elder," he pleaded, "give me your blessing to stay in the church tonight. I want to pray to the Lady Theotokos. In the morning we can discuss what we must do for my health." The elder gave his permission. Father Joachim's indomitable soul kept vigil all night, and in the morning after Orthos he said to Father Gregory, "I beg you not to do what the doctor said. Let's leave the matter of my health in the hands of the Theotokos. She will decide the matter. So that we might be assured of her intercession instead of meat and other foods, give me your blessing to continue my fast. Furthermore, I will put nothing sweet in my mouth. That way our mother, the Theotokos, will be glorified." The elder was amazed by the steely faith and strength of his will. He gave him his blessing, considering what he had taught Father Joachim. He remembered the time they had gone to the cell of Saint Constantine at Kathisma of the Great Lavra for him to learn iconography. His tireless disciple had maintained such discipline over his body that for a whole year he held to a rule of eating only once a day in the afternoon, and that standing. 6 months went by, and the doctor, greatly concerned, asked the elder if Father Joachim was still alive. "Of course he lives," he replied. The doctor asked to examine him. "I can find nothing wrong with him," the doctor said in amazement. "It seems the diet and rest I ordered have had results. He's completely recovered." Fathers Gregory and Joachim looked at each other and could hardly keep from laughing. When he was alone with the elder, the doctor learned the story of the recovered patients. He was speechless. He marveled at the strength of faith, and possibly for the first time knew he had witnessed a miracle. 8. His confession. Father Joachim always held high the pure flag of orthodoxy, so high, in fact, that some of his conduct seemed somewhat excessive. He always, however, acted from pure motives. The subject of the Church's situation, along with the calendar question, occupied him greatly. Every effort of the governing body to change things that the Holy Fathers had instituted in the Church troubled him. He fought with all the strength permitted him by his austere monastic life. All of the Greeks, from the lowliest citizen to the highest official, had a burning desire to be faithful members of the Church. His stay in America had taught him much. When he finally learned from Greek and foreign periodicals that certain high officials were Freemasons, among them even the King of Greece, George II, he was saddened and aroused. He wrote fearlessly to each one individually regarding the infection of Freemasonry. He counseled them to raise their voices against the enemies of religious and cultural interests. This was the cause of his being summoned to trial in Thessaloniki. He defended himself with candor and courage. Everyone was impressed by the enlightened judgment of this frail monk from Mount Athos. Even the newspapers paid him tribute. He accepted his conviction calmly, and like St. Nicodemus, he joyfully took the road of an exile to the island of Skopelos. The islanders were impressed by his prayers, fasting, and goodness of soul. Many of them remembered the exiled monk. His bright life left its mark on the island. The destructive advance of the German army found him in exile. After a while, he returned a free man to Mount Athos to continue his eremitic and desert life. Part 3, his last years. 1. A greater trial. Elder Joachim returned to his poor huts on Mount Athos like a fighter returning from battle. But instead of finding there peace and consolation, something happened that wounded afresh his pained heart. Having left Mount Athos on a business errand, one of the monks in the brotherhood became tied up in the world and eventually stayed. Father Joachim's sensitive heart suffered greatly. He decided to find him in spite of the fact that he had made a solemn oath never to leave Mount Athos again. But his love for his brother caused him to break his oath, and he started off to find and retrieve the prodigal. In spite of it all, the state of the brother's sin was stronger than any counsel, pleading, or tears. The captured soul was unmoved and unrepentant. After that painful spiritual expedition, Father Joachim returned to Mount Athos in peace. He had done his duty, but the pain and effort were too much, and his spent body did not recover. He took to his bed, never to rise again. 2. On a bed of pain. The elder, Father Gregory, had in the meantime fallen asleep in the Lord. For reasons of health, the writer of this life was forced to leave Mount Athos during the German occupation, and for that reason only one brother, Father Stephen, was left to care for Father Joachim. He had come with him from America, and he served the elder with great love and devotion. He became a loving light shining at his side, knowing, of course, that the elder might fail from moment to moment. He was like the sun setting in the west. In September of 1950, I received an urgent telegram from Father Joachim asking me to come to Mount Athos. I would be seeing him for the last time. I rushed there as quickly as I could. The tuberculosis had reduced him to skin and bones. His life and struggles, however, now made him seem full of peace. I cannot describe what I saw before me. A missionary, an exemplary disciple, an untiring ascetic, a confessor and apologist of the faith, one who loved God with all his soul and with all his heart and with all his strength and with all his understanding. I saw a fruitful olive tree being replanted from the garden of the Mother of God to the garden of eternity. In a 20-year period, he attained salvation and holiness, something perhaps that might have taken others 60 or 70 years of ascetic labor to achieve. I kissed his honorable hand, and he, with a faint but clear voice, explained why he had summoned me. I called you so I could see you for the last time here on earth. Not only for that, but to ask your forgiveness, in case I ever grieved you while you were here. And from his bed he bowed to the ground to ask me forgiveness. I tried to stop him by returning his matanya. Greatly moved, we exchanged the embrace of forgiveness. His words at that moment were full of thanksgiving to God for having brought us together after so many years. His joy at our meeting was boundless. I am happy, he said to me, because I die in repentance. I hope the same will happen to you. I am fortunate that God gave me time for repentance. The time for repentance was surely for him the most hopeful assurance of the reward from on high, a guarantee of heaven. He stopped speaking from weariness. 3. On to eternity. I stayed a few days with Father Joachim. He didn't talk much. The doctor said his condition would continue for a long while. For that reason I returned to Athens to take care of some business with my studies. Unfortunately, by the time I was to return, he had reposed in the Lord. There ended a life full of the gifts of the Holy Spirit. One day before he reposed, he called his faithful brother and said, "Brother Stephanos, come here while I'm still able to speak, and let's talk about a few things. Perhaps tomorrow there won't be a chance." He talked of the past, his time in America, his coming to Mount Athos, his obedience to the elder, his exile to Skopelos, his sickness. My brother, he continued in tears, I thank you for your long and patient service. Please forgive me for the times I might have saddened you. He embraced him with great emotion, and tearfully they kissed each other. The brother later remembered with thankfulness Father Joachim's spiritual guidance, something he had given him as a youth in America and up to this moment on Mount Athos. This was their last talk together. 4. Epilogue. As many as knew him, either closely or from afar, came to the funeral service to pray for the great struggler, whose tormented and now resting body was wrapped in arasso. They buried him in back of the hut's altar, which for years he had served in ascetic labor. The fathers of Mount Athos meet death just as the martyrs meet it. It is the heroic end of trial and the beginning of triumphant eternity. The athletes of Christ don't die. Father Joachim didn't die. He was translated from death to life. Of this all the fathers and brothers present were certain. Father Joachim reached those worlds for which his heart had so strongly yearned. Holy Father Joachim, pray to God for us.